Talk Like an Egyptian, a podcast about ancient Egypt with Dr. Chris Naunton and Iszi Lawrence. In this episode, we talk about the ancient Egyptian belief in the afterlife. What happened to them after they passed on? Thank you so much for joining us for another episode, our second ever one, of Talk Like an Egyptian, the podcast about ancient Egypt. And over the internet, speaking to me, not from the dead, is Dr. Chris Naunton.
Hello.
There he is. I don't know about you, Chris, but I'm not really expecting to have an afterlife in the same manner that the ancient Egyptians might have expected.
No, I must say I would be surprised if it turned out to be the same as what they thought.
At least you'd cope a little bit better than I would. I'd be stuck in like the Duat or the Nun or whatever it is going, I don't know what boat to get. What's a serpent doing? So what you learn as a kid about ancient Egypt is they got these pyramids and they were for the pharaoh to go inside, and that's his tomb, and he needs all his stuff for his afterlife. And we're just like, oh, really? And they took the afterlife very literally. And you need all your stuff. We know this. You need your body, which is why they had mummies. What are we basing our understanding of the afterlife on, Chris? What are the things that we're looking at?
Blimey. Well, so what do we have? We have lots of tombs, if it's not too elementary to sort of say, but what is a tomb? It's a place where you bury the body of the deceased person. In the case of the Egyptians, you would also place what we might call burial equipment with it, which would be stuff that symbolically the Egyptians would hope to take to the next life. Maybe also, in some sense, some of those things that a person might be buried with would be items that they were particularly fond of in life, mementos. I think we always have to bear in mind, of course, that, you know, all preparations for the afterlife are partly about the deceased person. They're also partly about the poor, sad, mourning people who are left behind. But so we've got the tombs. We have, in some cases, the mummies, the actual bodies of the people who've died. We have the things like the coffins and sarcophagi that the bodies were placed inside the tombs. We might have some of those grave goods. Those tombs and the objects are very often decorated with images and texts that help us to understand what the Egyptians believed was going to happen or what they needed to do in order to reach a kind of eternal paradise. And they view what's coming in the next life as being some sort of wonderful experience that they're desperate to get to. I guess that's mostly what we have: tombs, bodies, burial equipment. But there is a huge amount of it.
That's the thing. There is a huge amount of it, because I think a lot of misconceptions for people who are just approaching Egyptology for the first time, and they might be going, well, I'm going to go to Egypt, and so I thought I'd swat up a bit. We get this impression that it was just the pharaoh who got to the afterlife, because they're the ones we see the pyramids built for, and they're the ones who are buried in the Valley of the Kings. And we don't hear about all the other sort of mummies that there were, because a lot of people who could afford it got mummified, didn't they?
A lot of what we know about the process of mummification, of course, comes from the fact that we know some of these bodies have survived. And so, having, for example, the mummy of Tutankhamun, we can see, well, he was wrapped and he was embalmed, and this is what they did to the body in order to try to help arrest the process of decay and ensure that the body could survive. But we also have a description left to us by the historian Herodotus, who was writing around the 5th century BC, so towards the end of dynastic ancient Egyptian history. And he tells us about the process. And also, interestingly, he tells us that there were 3 different levels of mummification that you could choose from according to how much money you wanted to spend. So if you were very rich and you had lots of money to spend, you could have a very elaborate mummification. If you had less money to spend, you could have a slightly cheaper one. And then there was a sort of bargain basement budget option as well. I think we have to assume that the majority of the population probably couldn't have afforded any of this. But at the same time, you're absolutely right. It's not only the pharaoh. So, of course, pharaoh would have had the most incredible, elaborate and fine mummification carried out by the top embalmers in the country. But there would have been also lots of other members of the elite and even the sort of the upper classes and the upper middle classes, maybe even, who would also have gone through a whole load of elaborate rituals, including mummification, but also other things, to do everything they possibly could to make sure they get to this eternal paradise.
I mean, is it about that, or is it more of a status thing? If I look at our Christian burial grounds here in, if I go into the old graveyard and I see these Victorian graves and the angels and all of the rest of it, I think a lot of that is kind of for the living as a sort of marker of how important the family is and how much, it's a display for the people. So do you think that this belief in the afterlife was genuinely, a thing that they were investing because they really, really believed in it? Is there anything that basically, unlike our graves, this isn't just for show because of the stuff contained within the tomb?
No, I'm sure you're absolutely right that at least in some cases, some aspects of the preparation are absolutely to do with the effect on people who are still alive in the mortal world. It's not all about the next life. A good illustration of that, I think, is the way that elite tombs are arranged in a particular favourite period of mine, the 25th, 26th dynasties in Thebes, the great ancient city of Thebes. The very top people, the very richest and wealthiest people in that part of the country at that time built their tombs along a processional route. There was a festival every year called the Beautiful Festival of the Valley, when large parts of the population would go in procession with the statue of the god Ammon around a certain route, calling in on certain temples and that sort of thing. And these tombs were arranged along that route with their entrances deliberately sort of built on a sort of extension so that they would reach right towards that route. And it's fairly clear that the reason for doing that is that they wanted everybody to go past and see what a wonderful and enormous tomb, they had. And that, that's nothing to do with whether or not you get to the afterlife. That's all to do with showing off.
Well, no, it might be, because isn't part of the afterlife being remembered? Isn't that part
there is
of
that.
The
yes,
thing?
there is that. Yes, you're right. Yes, so it is important for the Egyptians that you be remembered and your name be spoken. It's also important that you be remembered in a good way as well. So, there is a part of the process of getting to the next life where you're judged on your deeds in life. And we have lots of bits of evidence from here and there that show that the Egyptians in death were very keen to make sure that everybody knew that, oh, yes, they did do the good things. They gave bread to the hungry man and they gave clothes to the naked man, and they didn't do any ill deeds and they didn't transgress this in this way or that way. It's also, I think, important for them to show that they'd succeeded, and being wealthy is a part of that. So having a big tomb and putting it right where everybody can see it is, you could argue, all part of getting to the next life as well as showing off.
Okay, so say I died, right, in ancient Egypt, and I believe in all of this. What am I expecting to happen to me? And I appreciate this is an impossible question because we're talking about 3,000 years here where belief changes. But as a basic, explaining it like I'm 5, what do I need? What happens? Because, obviously in, monotheistic religions, either you wait until like time runs out and you get woken up and then you go to heaven, or you go straight up to heaven, your soul leaves your body and you get judged, and what happens to you happens to you. But what happens to you if you're, an ancient Egyptian?
Okay, so...
Are you listening? Prepare yourself.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, first caveat, and you've sort of hinted at this as well, I think it's really important to understand that there isn't one set of beliefs. There's not one sort of canon of ideas that everybody buys into. So there's actually lots of different strands of belief which we can see coming through in various different bits of evidence. And altogether, all the different beliefs we are able to see in the evidence don't necessarily match up. They sort of contradict one another. There's also an evolution of belief over time. So somebody, born at the beginning of the 3rd dynasty wouldn't necessarily have had the same ideas about what's going to happen in the next life as somebody born at the end of the 29th, thousands of years later. But
they believed that you did live.
If I had a sort of a minute, they believe that there is an eternal afterlife, which is conceived of as being a kind of paradise. When we see visualizations of this, as we do in some tombs, it is essentially a kind of ideal Egypt. It's an agricultural sort of land where there are fields and people harvesting crops and animals and you see the Nile and you see fish. And so essentially it's, kind of the same life, we assume, as people would have had in this world, but, probably with all the annoyances of, I don't know, arguments with your little sister or your spouse or, or the man in the market. No, exactly. No disease, and you wouldn't get a headache. And if you had a drink of beer, then you wouldn't have a hangover. And
that sounds amazing.
All those little things, those little annoyances would all go, and everything would be marvelous. And you'd have people to do your work for you. So you could just sort of sit in a chair and relax and just look out across the Nile or across the fields and see everything. That's what you're going for. You also, in some sense, would probably be expecting to be dwelling alongside the gods. That's maybe another of these sort of slightly separate strands of belief. But, once you pass into the next life, you'll be in this sort of realm that is partly inhabited by gods. The getting there bit is the tricky part. So for the Egyptians, it's clear that they felt that your physical body had to survive in order for this to come about. But they also believed that there was a sort of separable part of you, a separable spirit part. So even if the dead body bit is lying in a coffin in a tomb, having been prepared in the correct way and mummified in the right way so that it survives and your face can be recognized, that was important. There's a separate spirit part of you that can sort of flit about, and they conceived of this in a number of different ways. So
Can I say my favourite one? My favourite one is the head with the wings.
Yeah,
that is my favourite. I think it's a bar. Is it
the bar? Okay,
yeah, so good.
We normally think of there being at least kind of three different kinds of spirits. So the car is your kind of double. It's a kind of shadow. So that looks like you and wanders around. And in some cases, we see depictions of the deceased in the form of a mummy and in the form of a car standing next door, as it were. We see that in the tomb of Tutankhamun, for example. The bar is usually depicted as a bird.
So cool.
And so that's the thing that can sort of fly away from your body and go out into the normal world and flit about and go and, watch over your family or whatever.
So when you see a bird, it might actually be a dead person just spying on you.
It could be. It could be that all birds are actually...
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, deceased people. Yeah. And a bit like dog owners looking like their dogs, maybe you can say something or tell something about a person from...
So the representation that you see of bars, which is just basically the person's face with wings, that could just be they're representing the person's face, but what you'd actually see is a bird flying around. I mean, this is what I want to know, this level of detail, Chris. It's very important when I prepare my tomb. This is...
Yeah, well, I mean, they're usually, I think they are usually, when you see the bar spirit in Egyptian art, it is usually just a bird with a human head. Yes, you're right.
They're just so cool. I love them.
So I suppose it would be like you would have your head and a sort of small, often kind of bluish.
Well, I wondered if it was a sort of a representation rather than a literal thing of a human, because I mean, that's not going to fly for a start. Human heads are heavy, even with your brain removed.
Yes,
skull's quite heavy.
Yeah, no, yeah. So yes, so we should say it's a human head, but in proportion with the body of the bird. So
yeah. Because I've seen them as just faces with wings, and they're hilarious with little feet, and I'm just like, that's going to fall on its face. Yeah. In the moment you try and land, you're not going to get one of those on a telephone wire. That's yeah.
By the way, as far as I know, we don't have any sort of evidence that the Egyptians kind of looked around in the mortal world, saw a bird, and kind of thought, "Oh, I wonder if that's Grandad." And yet we have all these depictions of the bar spirit as a bird or a winged something.
They definitely believed that part of the person could come back and like curse them and things like that, and it was important to behave for your ancestors. They knew that the ancestors knew what was going on, because you have these people writing. There's a letter in particular I'm thinking of a guy who's just sort of going, I've done everything for you, I've done this and I've done that, and yet still you make my life miserable. I think is something that he was writing to his dead wife or something. See, the thing is, guys, Dr. Chris Naunton is an actual Egyptologist, and I'm somebody who's read books and can't really remember anything and half remembering stuff. So Does this ring true to you?
No, it does. And even Egyptologists actually just read things and then can't remember what they've read or where they found it. So don't worry. There's no difference between the two of us there. I think what you're referring to is one of a group of texts which we refer to as letters to the dead for obvious reasons. It's a type of text that we have. So yes, there was a sense that you should do the right thing by your ancestors and that they were still around in some way. And again, I think it's important to remember that we shouldn't necessarily look for kind of internal consistency within these ideas.
It's religion that's nightmarish to do.
Yeah, right, exactly. So on the one hand, what you're hoping to do is dwell in all eternity in a kind of paradise version of agricultural Nile Valley Egypt or Nile Delta Egypt, I suppose. But also it's possible for a different bit of you. Is it a different bit of you? Is it the same bit of you? To go and visit your ancestors. And then there's another different bit of you that's actually still just lying in the coffin. And then there are various different stories around the journey. There's a kind of journey that you have to make in order to get to the next life. It's not really clear where it is, as it were, and yet you still have to make a journey. And the best developed, best known of these is the story we refer to as a book, another of these books that isn't actually a book, of Amduat. So the Amduat is an untranslated Egyptian phrase, actually, which means the am part means what is in, and Duat is the Egyptian word for the netherworld, the afterlife. So the Amduat is the what is in the netherworld. And it's not a book like the sort of thing that you have on a shelf.
Well, they had scrolls for a start.
They had papyri, but it's not even that. It's in their best developed form. They are texts and scenes which decorate the walls of tombs. The fullest realizations of these being in the tombs of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II in the Valley of the Kings. And these basically describe a journey which is made by the sun, as in the sun in the sky, through the night. So the Egyptians watched the sun dropping out of the sky every day, descending down towards the earth and eventually disappearing into the earth, and come up with this idea of what then happens, which of course isn't actually so far away from what astronomers would tell you is really going on. The sun is then making a journey in the Egyptian conception through the night, and at the end of that journey gets to the other end and sort of is then reborn and re-emerges into the new day. In that journey, in the Amduat story, the sun is kind of the same thing as the king. So in death, the king begins this journey, which starts off with him dying, just like the sun in some sense dies at the end of the day, descending down into the earth, and then going down, 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 down until the midway point, and then coming back up again to be reborn. And along the way, that journey, as it's depicted in the Amduat scenes, is a journey made on a boat, because everybody gets around in Egypt on a boat on the Nile. So how else do you make a journey, right? You do it on a boat. And it's made with lots of helpers, so lots of gods and goddesses and other helper beings who are ready and waiting in the next life and accompany the sun / the king on this journey. And along the way, there are various hazards that have to be negotiated. So you've got to know the right way. You've got to get past certain sort of guardian deities here and there, and you've got to be able to say the right things in order to get past them, say the right spells.
It makes a lot of sense if you played video games with like bad bosses at the end of each level.
Yeah, it's very much like, it is very much like that. And funnily enough, it is actually a bit like a kind of platform game.
Not a sandbox game. One of these ones like Super Mario, the original, where you're just like going in a straight line.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Mario or Sonic the Hedgehog running from sort of left to right along a level. And then you sort of jump over things and, it plays out like a comic strip, doesn't it? And then you meet a bad guy and you have to fight the bad guy, and then you move to the next level. And I
mean, it would make a great, any games developers who were listening, you can have this as a big
goodness.
play. It'd be great.
My goodness. Yeah.
Starting each day, as the sun.
They can have it for an enormous commission fee, right? Or maybe we don't. We probably don't own the copyright on the Amduat.
I don't think we do own it. I think that might have expired.
Yes. Oh, yeah, probably public domain.
Yeah.
The other thing to say actually is that the Amduat, both the journey and the landscape, and it is kind of depicted as a landscape with the body of water that the boat sails along, and it goes through sort of deserty bit, and there's a lake at some point. There are gates that you have to pass through, and so on, caverns. It's divided into 12, and those represent the 12 hours of the night. For the Egyptians, divided the day and the night into 12 hours, just as we do. I believe this is where that idea of 12 hours of the day and the night comes from. So a bit like, levels in a video game. Again, you pass through hour one, and certain things happen in hour one, and then you move, you complete that level and you move through to hour two. The big story happens around the middle of the night, where the sun god equals the king has to fight the snake, Arpep, which is a big old snake. And the king has to slay this snake with a knife, with the help of lots of gods and goddesses who have ropes as well. So there's sort of knives involved, and they eventually put a rope around his neck and subdue him. And this, of course, speaks to that idea of burial equipment. So very strikingly, Tutankhamun was buried with 2 daggers very close to his person. There's more than 5,000 objects in the tomb of Tutankhamun, but most of them sort of placed over here or in that room or that room. These daggers are actually on his person, inside all the coffins and everything. So he's got those 2 daggers with him. And, people have said, well, is that because he was a military kind of, was he a warrior? Did he need to go into battle with his daggers? Well, it seems much more likely to me that these are the knives that he needs in the Amduat journey to slay Arpep or ward off the demons in the next life. Anyway, so
Not
to
happens. Sort of like hurts any Egyptologists in the 1920s who might discover him. It's not self-defense for that reason.
Yeah, maybe.
Not a reanimation thing.
Yes, I wonder what Carter was thinking.
Well, it's very similar. What that strikes me is it's very similar to later, post-Bronze Age, of people who going over the river Styx and you put coins in your eyes when they have currency. So you can pay the ferryman. It's a similar.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And I reckon as well, and this is based on Iszi, just going, I reckon the whole river Styx and all of that sort of stuff, the Greeks nicked it off the Egyptians. This whole idea of there being a watery part of the underworld, that is definitely from ancient Egypt, and they stole the idea.
Maybe.
In my view, I'm a big fan of blaming the Greeks for just thieving everybody else's stuff.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, well, I'm happy to advocate for ancient Egypt.
I think so. We don't have any classics people on here. If you are a classics person, do write in and tell us we're wrong, and we will ignore it. No, we won't. But no, and it's talklikeanegyptianpod@gmail.com. Anyway, can you just clear this up for me? Because I get this confused when I'm reading a lot. Because there's the nun, and the duat. Are they one and the same thing, or are they different things? Because the nun is chaos, isn't it? Or watery chaos.
Those are different things. So the duat is the afterlife, is the underground. It is underground. Because it's where the sun goes when he drops down into the earth before rising again across the other side of the river in the east. So it's where the sun goes, and it's where this journey plays out. The noon is the word that's given to, and it's embodied by a goddess, Noon. This is the watery chaos nothingness that exists before the creation of the world. So, according to a completely different set of Egyptian ideas, there are various different stories as to how the world and humankind came about. But one of which involves the idea that there is a moment of creation, but there's also a time before there is anything. And before there is anything, there is nothing but watery nothingness. And life springs forth from the watery nothingness.
We don't have to cover the creation. We're going to do that. We'll do that later. Because I'm much more a fan of Ptah's version than of the other guys. Yeah, I like that one best. But we'll talk about it another time.
Okay.
Because so weird, the idea that it's about the king /son / going on his boat journey. Is this every night, or is this?
That's a great question. Everybody always asks that question, because does the king have to do it every night? I can only sort of answer this by saying, don't ask that question. Forget about that. we can't answer it. No, I think the answer is no. And maybe actually something else to point out, which maybe is partly helps us to, in our own minds, answer this. And I say partly don't ask it because I suspect the Egyptians weren't questioning of these things. I somehow suspect that we, being in our modern society, not so religious and much more taken with sort of scientific ideas, we're much more conditioned to ask questions, assuming there's a kind of empirical knowledge answer to everything. And when it comes to your belief in the completely bonkers Egyptian afterlife, you just can't ask those questions expecting there to be a kind of internal logic. There isn't, so, but maybe one way of explaining or partly answering this is to say that at a certain point in the middle of the night, around the 6th hour, I think it is, there's a moment where the sun god, and the sun represents the king, but also specifically the spirit of the king, the bit that is going to be reborn. But there's another bit of the king, which is the dead body, the corpse. And you remember we talked earlier about how, those things could be sort of separated. There's the body, but there's also the spirit. So the sun is representative of the spirit, but there's also the dead body. And at this moment in the middle of the night, in the deepest part of the underworld, in the 6th, I think it's the 6th hour, the two come together, the spirit represented by the sun god, the dead body represented by Osiris, who, according to another Egyptian myth, was the Egyptian king, but was then slain. He was killed by his jealous brother.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
to be fair to Set, right, he killed Osiris, but only after Osiris stole his wife/sister. So
there's an awful lot of weirdness in that story. Yes,
it's great.
It's very soap operatic. Maybe there's another movie in there, another
We'll...
copyright-free story for a movie maker or video game designer.
Exactly.
Osiris then becomes the kind of the best example of a dead person and dwells in the afterlife forever. So the dead body bit of the king who's just died is embodied by Osiris. So the sun god and Osiris, symbolizing the spirit of the king and the dead body of the king, come together at this point. And that's the moment of resurrection, when the resurrection process starts to begin.
And when the sun comes up again.
Well, exactly. It's the bit where you're at the deepest part of the night, the middle of the night. So yes, you're starting to head upwards after this point. You see lots of images of gods and goddesses, and it looks like they're sitting down, but with chairs missing. Sometimes kids do that thing at school where you steal somebody's chair and they fall down. Ha ha. It looks like somebody's just done that, but that's the Egyptian artist's way of depicting gods and goddesses in the moment of rising up from having been lying down, so being resurrected. And at that moment also, in the same sort of scene, you see the bodies of all the earlier deceased kings. So they're all there. That bit of them it stays in the afterlife. So if we're thinking about the Amduat as it appears in the tomb of Thutmose III, Thutmose III's body and that bit of him is going to stay forever in the Amduat. The spirit bit of him is going to follow the sun god and be reborn into the new day. Whether then all those spirits of all those kings somehow are at one with the sun every day. I think I think that's the bit of the question we just don't ask.
And also, I'm not a king, so I'm not going to be part of that. Does that mean the king has a different role in the afterlife than your general Egyptian baker?
Yeah, so this is specific to the king. The journey as it's made by everybody else is not nearly so well developed in the evidence that we've got. So there's the idea of a journey, there's the idea of a journey on a boat, there's the idea of reaching the Hall of Judgment at a certain point, not clear how you get there. And then there's the idea that eventually you reach this paradise called the Iaru. But that the journey is nowhere near as well developed as it is in the Amduat narrative. So what we can say about what happens to the king is much more detailed and clear than what happens to everybody else.
But you mentioned the Hall of Two Truths, the judgment and the weighing of the heart. Can we talk about that?
Yes, that is one of the best known, I guess, isn't it? Scenes in the what happens.
Well, it's like a proper courtroom.
Yeah.
It's like recognisable to us today. It's weird.
Yeah, so you've got Osiris, haven't you, at sort of one side of the scene.
As the judge.
Seated on a throne inside his shrine, as the judge, exactly. And then you've got the deceased who's been sort of led towards this point. You sometimes see Anubis, jackal-headed Anubis, leading the deceased into this position. Anubis' role is specifically to supervise the rituals that occur in between the death of the individual and the eternal hereafter. So he's very much involved at this point. He supervises mummification and revivification.
It's very obvious where that comes from, in that jackals probably were hanging around the necropolis quite a lot. So you'd see them at night, and you'd see them around the gravestones, and you'd see them certainly around where the smell of dead body and decays were, which is around where the mummification happens. So it does make total sense that is the god that's used to depict.
Yes, you're right, exactly. So he's there, you've got the deceased, and then you have this giant set of weighing scales.
Don't forget the jury of gods in the background as well.
Yes, exactly.
You've got a jury that is literally a courtroom.
Attendant, gods looking on. A giant set of weighing scales, a kind of seesaw thing with two little bowls, just like what you would have seen in a grocer's shop or a pharmacy or something in the past. And on one side of the weighing scales, you have the heart of the deceased individual, which is depicted with the hieroglyphic symbol for a heart, which looks a bit like a pot, but it's meant to represent the heart. A vessel for containing things, which of course the heart is. And on the other side, you've got a feather. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the significance of the heart, because that's the only. It wasn't in a canoptic jar, was it? It was left in the body.
No,
itself.
It was meant exactly. It was meant. Yeah, so we might have said, but didn't earlier when we were talking about mummification, that part of the process is the removal of these organs. The lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines are deliberately removed, but then preserved. That's about removing impurities, and from a scientific point of view, it's about removing impurities and arresting decay. There's also a sort of ritual.
You're still going to need them, so you've got to keep them.
Exactly.
But not.
Exactly. Whereas the brain is removed, but they do that by sticking a stick up your nostrils, mushing your brain around, and then sort of scooping it out as a kind of goo. So as far as the Egyptians are concerned, your brain not important. Don't need that.
No.
Your heart, though, you're quite right. It is supposed to stay in the body, and it's an important part of the judgment. We'll get to that in just a sec. There's also a specific Book of the Dead, a series of Book of the Dead spells that relate to this, which are often inscribed on a particular kind of scarab, which we call a heart scarab, which is then placed on the body over the place where you would find the heart. And it's from the heart that the Egyptians believed your thoughts came.
Now, to me, this makes total sense, because if you are scared, if you're excited, if you're thinking like, oh, I've got to think quickly, your heart beats faster. Even if you're not exercising and you're scared, it goes because your thoughts go really quickly. And that, to me, makes a lot more sense than this sort of random stuff in your skull, which is just gloopy and doesn't seem to, you get a headache maybe occasionally, but it's got really nothing to do with, what you're thinking. What you're thinking, you feel in your guts and your heart, and you feel it in your body. You don't feel it in your face.
True. Yeah, true. Yeah, exactly.
It makes more sense, guys. That's all I'm saying. They're right.
Yeah, they got it right. So the heart is weighed against this feather, and the feather is a very particular feather. Again, it's a hieroglyphic symbol, but it also is a symbol that you see elsewhere too. It represents Ma'at. And Ma'at is the name.
I like Ma'at.
Maya, two A's. Two A's also with a little apostrophe.
In between.
You
Ma'at.
need a little breath in between.
Maybe.
Exactly. It's Ma'at. Yeah.
And I say Ma'at because I don't know.
I mean, we don't know how Egyptian was pronounced.
This is true.
As we know. So your version is as good as mine.
It could be.
And so Ma'at is a concept of sort of truth and justice and a harmony.
Well, she's a god as well, isn't she?
Yeah. So those concepts are embodied in the form of a goddess, Ma'at. So sometimes we see the goddess standing in for those ideas.
I sort of see as justice as well. It's not so much like goodness, it's more justice and truth and order.
Yeah, the rightfulness and the right thing. Difficult to pin the concept down, but it's those sorts of things, truth and that sort of stuff.
It's not necessarily goodness, though. I think that's an important distinction, that Your heart isn't being weighed against what's good, it's being weighed against what's right. And there's a difference there.
I think that's probably, yes, right, yeah.
Yeah. It's because this is what I like to do when I go to schools, you see. I like to blow their minds with this. The whole. I'm going to ruin it for Chris now because he's explained it so well. I'm just going to barrel through. Because also depicted there is Amit, who is this sort of wonderful monster with the head of a crocodile, the body of the lion, and the back legs of a hippo, and he's just hungry for hearts. So that's what he loves. He loves to have yum, yum, yum at the heart, right? That's what he wants to do. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you if you're an ancient Egyptian, because you need your heart to go into the afterlife. And if Amit eats it, that's annihilation. That is basically you die twice, you're never coming back, you don't get an afterlife, and that sucks. And so that's the big fear. That's what you don't want to happen. There's no hell, but that is bad. And so what you want to do is you want to get into heaven. And if you ask any Muslim children, any Christian children, how to get into heaven, they'll be like, oh, what has to happen if you're really good? And then your heart will weigh less than the feather and you'll get into the afterlife. But that isn't how it's depicted, is it, Chris?
Well, they have to balance.
Exactly.
Is that what you meant? Yeah, they have to balance, yes.
You think a Christian or a Muslim kid goes, if you've done a lot of sin and bad things, your heart will weigh heavier than the feather and it will be fed to the god Amit. But I point out, if you are too good, if you've lived a perfect life where you've just given all of your money and all your lapis lazuli to slave girls, and you've never been late to a lesson, or you've never said a horrible word to your brother, that's no good. You're too good, and your heart will get fed to Amit. You've got to balance. You can't be a goody two-shoes and get into the afterlife.
Yeah,
maybe. That's my logic. I mean, it might be impossible to be that good, and you have to be as good as you can, which is only the balance. It could be that. Because the way I sort of rationalise it is that, in ancient Egypt, the Nile is your key thing. It has to flood every year, and therefore they're quite OCD about it not flooding and anything changing too much, which is why their culture is so conservative. Obviously, it does change, but it's still a very conservative society that there's ever been. I mean, they're still believing in roughly the same gods and everything else. And that's because if that Nile doesn't flood, nobody eats and everything is chaos, right? The Nun is chaos. We don't want chaos, right? We want order. And so that means nothing can change too much, which means you can't be too bad, but then you can't be too good. When we have these periods of sort of intermediate periods, they call it, where there is no pharaoh, you have all these historians sort of writing how terrible it is that all these slave girls are wearing lapis lazuli, as well as the fact that, people are robbing people and everything else. So it is this sort of disorder that they're most terrified of. And therefore, it isn't good to change anything. It's not good to improve your lot too much. It's not good if you're very rich to become very poor. You have to stay in your station. You have to keep everything together, which is why it's important to be, handing homework later occasionally. That is my logic of how it works.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you could definitely. I wonder if you could almost argue that the Ma'at feather is balanced against maybe sort of human failings. I mean, it's definitely. People often ask, why do we see in some cases the god Seth, who seems to embody all these bad things? He murders his brother Osiris. He steals the throne. He does all kinds of dastardly things in the story.
He tries to kill Horus.
He tries to go after Horus and kill him too. He's a nasty piece of work, Seth. So why would he be worshipped? And the idea seems to be that actually the Egyptians recognize that you've got to have balance in the universe. So in order to have things that are good, you also have to have maybe some things that are bad. Or, in order to have things that are orderly, you also have to have things that are chaotic. And for the Egyptians, that kind of duality is very present in a lot of their ideas and a lot of their symbols and even their architecture, a kind of a one and the other, a yin and a yang kind of thing. And maybe that is what's going on in the weighing of the heart.
Even the layout of their cultures and cities, you do tend to find that all of the living cities are on the east coast of the Nile, and all of the necropolises are on the west coast of the Nile. The coast is the wrong side, but the side of the Nile. And this sort of idea that the dead are in the west and the living are in the east. And that's to do with the way the sun goes round. And it's interesting, the fact that they do seem to have this, as you say, this balance. I just think it's fear of the Nile not flooding, which I think is very fair. But what I really like as well is you can cheat it all with these little scarab beetle hearts. the scarab hearts, which the spell on that is just to tell your heart to shut up.
Yeah.
Because I think the idea is that when your heart's being weighed, what it's actually doing is confessing all of your actions in the life and all your thoughts and beliefs and that sort of thing. And all that this is a basic gag to go, and the heart can't physically tell anybody. And so it's just assumed, well, that's balance, isn't it? Because it's not too good, it's not too bad. We've got no evidence, therefore you're through.
There's an element, I think, of thou doth protest too much in some of those autobiographical inscriptions that say how marvellous they were. And, I just certainly didn't do anything wrong. Oh, no. And, I did all the nice things. And obviously a lot of this is very formulaic, but everybody's human, aren't they? Everybody's done.
I haven't. I'm perfect. I'm going to have
I knew
to
you
make
haven't
a few.
actually. No, I knew. Yeah. I knew. Yeah, or at the least
I'm
that's
going to have
what
to do
you
some bad things
say.
before I die in order to get through the Hall of Two Truths, I reckon. or just get somebody to make me a nice scarab.
If indeed it is all about balance and not just about being good, it's a risky. It's a risky business.
Well, if it was about being good, they'd depict it that way, wouldn't they? You're not going to show the wrong instructions on your assembly of IKEA furniture, are you? That's
No.
Anyway, if you've got thoughts about this, do write into the show and tell us what you think. I think Izzy is definitely wrong on this.
Tell us what you've done that's good. Don't just write in and tell us things that you've done that are bad. We might get overwhelmed with confessions. That's not the idea. There are Catholic priests for that.
Indeed. Well, I think actually now is a good time to end this episode because I think we've had a good sort of like.
Have we gone off-piste?
We've got off-piste and I love it. So thank you so much for listening and downloading to this podcast. You can go to patreon.com/Talk Like an Egyptian, and where you will find more bonus content. And also, it's just a great way of supporting the show because how popular this is and how many people sign up for our Patreon depends on whether we do more episodes. So if you like it, please do leave us a review. Do all of those lovely things because that would make us, I believe the word is happy, wouldn't it, Chris?
Yes, exactly. And give us a better chance of getting to the next life. I don't know.
Well, who knows? I mean, it gives us a better chance of getting to the next series, certainly.
That's what I meant. Yes, not the eternal hereafter. I meant the next series. Yeah.
So we're going to try this again. So far, right, we've done this twice because we did a little bonus in episode 1. And and so far we failed to do this together. So we're going to do,
here we go,
a classic ancient Egyptian sort of farewell. Okay, after 3, 3, 2, 1, life, prosperity, health. Yeah, I think we're out of time again. But, we got, there'll be another day at the end of another duet. Thanks for listening to Talk Like an Egyptian. To support the podcast and ensure another series, join us on patreon.com/Talk Like an Egyptian and unlock bonus content. Get in touch, talklikeanegyptianpod@gmail.com or use the hashtag TLAE. We need your questions for the end of the series, so please don't hold back. Remember to leave us 5 stars of newts and share this episode with your friends. Find all links at talklikeanegyptian.com.